At around 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, April 4th, 1991, Mary Jo Frug sat down with her husband Gerald and their 16-year-old daughter for dinner. The couple also had an older child, Stephen, aged 20, and the family lived on Spark Street in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was a well-to-do neighbourhood made up of Victorian-style houses, which reached upwards of $1 million in price, even in the early 90s. The prestigious Buckingham Brown and Nichols School stood nearby, and the area was home to lawyers, doctors, architects, and other professional people. It was perceived as a pleasant and safe area to live, with the crime rate being one of the lowest in the Greater Boston metropolitan area. All this made what happened that evening even more shocking and puzzling. After finishing her meal, Mary Jo made a phone call to her friend Judy. The pair chatted for some time and made a date to meet for breakfast the following morning. The call ended at 8:30 p.m, after which Mary Jo decided to take a stroll to a convenience store called Sage JR, situated 5 blocks away on Huron Avenue. She visited the shop at least a few times a week and was well known by staff there. Mary Jo had visited just the day before, as she had gone there to collect a spa membership card, which she had lost and was subsequently handed in at the counter. This time, she was going to pick up some cookies. Mary Jo left her house shortly after 8:30 p.m, leaving her 16-year-old daughter doing her homework with Gerald. That evening, Mary Jo was wearing a white top, black skirt and white tights. I believe she also took a black coat, as there was a chill in the air. Mary Jo was a petite figure, with shoulder-length hair, variously described as dark and red. She was most likely wearing makeup, as Mary Jo was renowned for doing so, even when she was just popping out on a quick errand. Mary Jo would often wear thin-rimmed glasses, though I do not know if she had them with her when she stepped out of the front door that night. Mary Jo looked younger than her 49 years, due to her healthy diet and active lifestyle. She particularly enjoyed walking, and would use the time to think over issues she was dealing with in her busy and demanding job. Mary Jo was a prominent and highly respected legal scholar at New England School of Law. Vanity Fair magazine described the institution as a blue-collar alternative to its near neighbour, the prestigious Harvard University. Mary Jo was a well-known figure around campus and could often be seen cycling to lectures wearing a miniskirt. She had taught at the school for the last 10 years, but for the current academic year, Mary Jo was on sabbatical at Radcliffe College's Bunting Institute, based at Harvard University. Mary Jo specialised in family law and was well known for writing on a plethora of legal matters from a feminist perspective. The route Mary Jo took to the convenience store went along Spark Street, which was busy and well lit. She walked a little over a block from her home, crossing Brattle Street, and reached Holy Trinity Armenian Church, situated on the corner of Brewster and Spark Street. Just as she was passing the driveway of the church, Mary Jo was set upon and viciously attacked. The details of exactly what happened are not fully known, because if there were eyewitnesses, they have never come forward. This is what we do know. At around 5 minutes to 9 p.m, a screaming Mary Jo flagged down a passing motorist before collapsing on the ground next to a fire hydrant. I should say that alternative reports suggest that when the motorist saw Mary Jo, she was already on the floor. Alarmed, the motorist abruptly stopped and ran inside the church to look for help, believing that Mary Jo had been hit by a car. In the sanctuary, a choir of 40 people were rehearsing for an upcoming concert. Due to the volume of their singing, they had not heard the screams from the driveway. The motorist explained there was a woman in need of medical assistance, and many members of the choir flooded out to see if they could help. The choir were dressed in tuxedos and evening wear, as they were due to have a promotional photograph taken that evening. When they saw Mary Jo lying in her white top and black skirt, some wondered if perhaps she was one of their members who was running late for the rehearsal. One member of the choir, David, bent down beside Mary Jo and noticed that her eyes were half opened. He pushed some strands of hair from her face and held her right hand. He asked, quote, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" There was no reply. A few people living close to the church had heard the screams from inside their houses and telephoned the police. I believe the motorist must have also telephoned the emergency services from the church. One member of the choir was a professor at Harvard who recognised Mary Jo and knew she lived nearby. She went to the house and fetched Gerald and Mary Jo's daughter, both of whom rushed to the scene. Gerald was in utter shock and refused to believe the woman lying in a pool of blood was his wife. Mary Jo's daughter collapsed onto her knees and wept. At 8:57 p.m, the Cambridge police responded to a call saying there had been a traffic accident near Brattle Street. When they arrived, they quickly realised that Mary Jo had not collapsed after being hit by a car. It was evident that she had been stabbed several times and was bleeding profusely. Paramedics soon arrived and administered first aid. Mary Jo was taken to Auburn Hospital by ambulance, but was pronounced dead on the way. Persons Unknown is a true crime podcast dedicated to unsolved murders and missing persons cases from all over the world. I'm John. I live in Wales, UK, and I research, write and produce this podcast. New episodes are released every other Monday. If you'd like to become a supporter of the podcast, please see the link in the show notes. For as little as the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can help to ensure these historical and lesser-known cases from around the world are read and gain exposure. The show notes are also where to find social media details, information about the sources used for each case, and transcripts for all the episodes. If you enjoy the podcast, please consider leaving a review on your app. They make a real difference, and I love reading them. Finally, you can help others hear about Persons Unknown by sharing and recommending on social media. Thank you so much for listening. Now back to this week's episode. Mary Jo Frug, maiden name Gow, was born in 1941 in St. Joseph, Missouri. As a young girl, she loved to read and was very sociable. Exceedingly bright and intelligent, Mary Jo graduated from elite women's college, Wellesley College, before moving to Washington, D.C. and obtaining a law degree from George Washington University. In 1971, Mary Jo achieved a master's degree from Columbia University, after which she worked in various legal services in Washington, D.C. and New York. Her vast experience and intellectual prowess came to the fore when she began teaching law at Villanova Law School in Pennsylvania. During this time, her husband Gerald, or Jerry for short, whom she married in 1968, was general counsel for the health administrator in the New York Mayor's office. In 1981, the couple and their 2 children moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, with Gerald based at Harvard Law School and Mary Jo at New England School of Law. Now it is called New England Law Boston. Cambridge itself is a vibrant city located just across the Charles River from Boston. Known primarily as the home of 2 of the world's most prestigious universities, Harvard University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, Cambridge is a hub of innovation, education and culture. Gerald and Mary Jo would walk to work together, often stopping for a coffee and a breakfast muffin in Harvard Square before going on to their respective places of work. Both Mary Jo and her husband Gerald were part of the critical legal studies movement which looked to highlight the inadequacies of a legal system which it saw as benefiting rich white males at the expense of fairness and justice. One particular area of interest for Mary Jo was examining discrimination towards women through sexist images used in law school textbooks. In 1985, Mary Jo published some seminal material which the Boston Globe, April 5, 1991, described as groundbreaking. One essay, titled Postmodern Legal Feminism, explored, amongst other things, how the legal system did not adequately protect women from abuse, the abortion laws which pressured women into motherhood, and the sexualization of the female body by the legal profession. At the time, she was viewed as a radical, even by some feminists. Academics who were part of the cultural legal studies movement, which had begun in the 1970s and was particularly influential through the 1980s, were often at loggerheads with older, more conservative law professors. The information concerning Mary Jo's academic background provides a useful insight into the person she was and the issues she cared about. For some, it also hints at a possible reason behind her brutal slaying. This was undeniably a particularly heinous murder. Mary Jo had been stabbed at least 4 times. Some reports indicate 5. Twice in the upper inner thigh, which were caused by an upward thrust, and twice on the left side of the chest. Both of the latter wounds were fatal. According to Cambridge police, there was no sign Mary Jo had been sexually assaulted. One could argue the location of the stab wounds on the lower body may suggest a sexual element to the murder. It was theorised that Mary Jo had been knocked to the floor by the first blow. The killer had then stood astride her, or perhaps straddled and pinned her down, before continuing the attack. The academic community of Cambridge was left in shock by the murder. Both staff and students were in mourning. The day after the murder, a sit-in organised by Harvard students to highlight the lack of diversity within the school was cancelled out of respect. The mood on campus was sombre, and as an act of remembrance, pink carnations and white chrysanthemums were left near the place Mary Jo had lost her life. The investigation into the murder was a joint effort amongst law enforcement agencies. 6 police officers from the Massachusetts State Police and local Cambridge Police worked the case for the first few days. The crime scene did provide them with a couple of clues. Plaster casts were taken of footprints found a block from the scene, and a 7-inch military knife was recovered from a front lawn on Appleton Street. Some reports say the knife was 11 inches, but I think this must include the handle. Appleton Street is just a 5-minute walk from the murder scene. Police would not say if blood was found on the blade, and at first were non-committal as to whether it was the murder weapon. It was sent to Washington for the FBI to conduct forensic tests. A year later, an article in the Boston Globe, April 5, 1992, certainly suggests that it was the murder weapon. Other sources say the knife could not be connected to the murder, and that no fingerprints were on the handle, and no trace of blood was found on the blade. From my research, it is unclear whether the knife found in Appleton Street was the actual murder weapon. It wasn't very long before police developed a lead after receiving a few phone calls from people describing what the Boston Globe referred to as, quote, questionable activities in the vicinity shortly before the murder. The exact details of these questionable activities were not released, but police said they were looking to find a white male, said to be in his late teens to early 20s, who was seen loitering in some bushes close to the crime scene in the hours before the murder. The man was 5'11" to 6'1", with brown hair, and was wearing dark clothing and high-top sneakers. Police would not say if the man was seen near the Frug's house. The Boston Globe reported on April 30, 1991, that the man was spotted in bushes near the corner of Sparks and Brewster Street. Other residents came forward, saying they had seen someone matching the description, running from the scene, down Brattle Street and into Appleton Street. While the detectives working the case had a possible suspect to hunt, they were struggling to determine a motive. It was possible the stabbing was the result of a botched mugging. However, all the items Mary Jo had left the house with could be accounted for. Her purse or handbag was found nearby with her wallet and $20 still inside. It did not appear that the bag had been rifled through or even opened by the killer, and all its usual contents were accounted for. This left police pursuing a number of potential avenues. Very early on, rumours circulated that the killing could be connected to Mary Jo's personal or work life. There was no direct evidence or information to support this theory, but police could not rule out this possibility. Friends dismissed any suggestion that Mary Jo was leading a double life or involved romantically with someone else. There were rumours that Mary Jo and Gerald had an open marriage, as mentioned in a Vanity Fair article from October 1992, and that both had taken lovers. This idea was dismissed by the couple's friends. They all said Mary Jo lived a very open life, and it was not conceivable that there was a part of it she had kept hidden from them. What about her work life? Could Mary Jo's feminist writing have triggered a man to the extent that he wanted to see her dead? Her friends did not think it was possible. During interviews with police, friends and family were asked if Mary Jo had any known enemies, but the answer was always no. Mary Jo's writing was not confrontational, and those who knew her said she did not have a chip on her shoulder and was not angry or resentful towards men. They could not believe that anyone would be motivated to harm or inflict violence on Mary Jo based on her beliefs. It was said that even those who disagreed with her loved her. She was described unanimously as a warm, witty, caring, passionate, and charismatic person. She was loved and respected by her colleagues and students. Casual acquaintances likewise spoke favourably of Mary Jo. Local shop owners described her as polite and unassuming. Another possibility was that Mary Jo had been targeted by an angry student over a poor grade, or perhaps by a student who had become infatuated with her. Mary Jo was said to be devoted to her students, but colleagues said she had never mentioned having a stalker, or for that matter, any students who made her feel uncomfortable. That being said, one Harvard law professor did say to a journalist from the Boston Globe that students from time to time develop crushes on staff, and that Mary Jo had more than most. Police officers did interview students and looked over essays from Harvard Law School and New England School of Law. A source close to the investigation informed the Boston Globe that a third-year student from Harvard had their rooms searched by investigators. This was done with the student's permission, and they did not need a warrant. The student was apparently a close friend of Mary Jo's husband, Joe Frug, and was the first person Gerald had telephoned after his wife's death. The Boston Globe said the student had been offering comfort and support to Gerald since the murder. Nothing incriminating was found during the search, and there was no evidence to make him a suspect. Both the student and Gerald Frug declined to be interviewed by the Boston Globe. Another proposition was that the murder had been a completely random act. The killing was not planned, and Mary Jo had not been specifically targeted. She had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Police did say the crime indicated the killer had a lot of rage. In this scenario, the killer may have had a deep hatred of women, possibly all women, or perhaps Mary Jo reminded them of someone from their own life. Mary Jo's murder did come during a spate of violent sexual attacks on women. Just the day before, and 6 miles north of Cambridge, in the town of Arlington, a woman was raped, and a few hours later there was an attempted kidnapping of a woman in Somerville. This is just 2.5 miles from Cambridge. A composite was drawn up by police of this suspect. 4 days prior to that, a Cambridge woman was raped by an intruder at her home. I have come across nothing in my research that has connected these cases, and I do not know whether they were resolved or remain unsolved. Mary Jo's funeral was held on the morning of April 8, 1991. It was a private affair reserved for family and close friends. A much larger memorial service took place that afternoon at the Memorial Church in Harvard Yard and was led by Rabbi Sally Finstone. Over 1,000 people attended the service, which lasted an hour and included some of Mary Jo's favourite pieces of music, such as Wild World by Cat Stevens. A gamut of professors and writers shared speeches about Mary Jo's energetic character and brilliant mind. The most touching speech came from Mary Jo's 20-year-old son Stephen, who was a sophomore at Harvard. Mary Jo's passion and drive was summed up when he described his mother as someone who would typically eat the icing but leave the cake. As an aside, to recognise her distinguished and influential legal career, Mary Jo was posthumously awarded an honorary degree by the New England School of Law. It was the first time this had been done. While the service was a time to celebrate Mary Jo's life, the anger people felt at the futility of the way her life had been taken was tangible. Middlesex County District Attorney, DA, Thomas Riley, was involved with the case from the beginning, visiting the murder scene within hours of the crime taking place. Within a relatively short period, he had overseen an investigation that had spoken to hundreds of people. Nevertheless, the killer or killers and motive remained elusive. DA Riley decided to reach out to detectives across the country for help. Thousands of teletypes, printed messages sent via phone lines, were sent all over the United States. DA Riley wanted to gather information on similar murders elsewhere, especially murders of feminists. The investigation did receive one reply from North Carolina about a case that appeared similar, but after further inspection, it transpired that the woman, who was a feminist, was killed by her husband. The teletypes were sent 3 times a day for many months, so that each new shift would have the chance to read about Mary Jo's murder. Sadly, no solid leads came about. 6 months after the murder, there were 2 state police and 1 Cambridge police detective still working the case, although none of them was based on it full time. A family friend who was familiar with police operations kept abreast with developments and informed the family of any updates, of which there were few. According to the Boston Globe, October 20th, 1991, friends and family continued to believe the murder had been random. The police were keeping an open mind, but Sergeant William Powers of the State Police explained to the Boston Globe that they had interviewed many people who disagreed with Mary Jo, but all said they would never consider turning to violence. If they had an issue with Mary Jo, they would simply write a paper as a rebuttal. Investigators did say that they had had a difficult time conducting interviews with some people in the legal profession. Detectives often had to wait long periods of time to conduct interviews. As many of these individuals had legal training, they wanted their lawyers present when they were questioned. The process was frustrating for investigators, as many interviewees did not volunteer information, only doing so if they were asked specific questions. The State Police and Cambridge Police kept going over old ground and seemed resigned that the case was going to remain unsolved for some time. They received some anonymous tips, which had led nowhere, but they still hoped the case could be cracked. Despite no one coming forward as an eyewitness, police were convinced that someone travelling past the Armenian church that night must have seen something. Whenever arrests were made for violent crime in the area, they checked to see if there was any connection, but found none. In fact, nothing quite like it had happened in Middlesex County since, which made some investigators believe that Mary Jo had been specifically targeted. During the first year of the investigation, the FBI were asked to produce a profile of the killer. I can't see that this was ever made public. The one investigator ominously told the press that the culprit could be a pillar of the community, someone you would never suspect. As time moved on, friends, family and colleagues continued to remember and pay tribute to Mary Jo. In a ceremony in San Antonio, Texas, a fitting tribute was paid when she was posthumously awarded Law Teacher of the Year by the Society of American Law Teachers. The first time this had happened. Before her death, Mary Jo had been working on a casebook about women and law. Family members and colleagues decided to release the unfinished draft in her memory, and it was published in March 1992. Titled A Postmodern Feminist Legal Manifesto, it explored themes of violence against women. Not everyone within the Harvard Law School was happy with this draft and its contents. Just as those closest to Mary Jo were coping with the first anniversary of losing her, they were forced to deal with an unexpected and unpleasant distraction. Exactly a year to the day the murder had happened, a cruel parody mocking the recently published draft was printed in the Review. The Review, spelt R-E-V-U-E, was an annual spoof edition of Harvard Law Review, written by third-year students. The students were part of the Law Review Association, which was supposed to be interested in maintaining the highest standards of legal scholarship. The parody was first introduced at a banquet for faculty members and invited guests. Gerald Frug had been invited to the banquet, but had declined the offer due to it falling on the anniversary of his wife's death. The fact that he wasn't present saved him some heartache. The 5-page parody was full of inside jokes, sexual innuendo, and made fun of Mary Jo's death. It portrayed Mary Jo as a paranoid woman. The president of Harvard Law School denounced the parody, calling it vicious and degrading. After reading the parody, which so openly mocked Mary Jo's death, the police were keen to talk to its authors. But after interviewing them, investigators were confident they had nothing to do with the murder. The parody caused a lot of conflict within the Harvard Law Department, with many people feeling ashamed and saddened that some students felt it humorous and appropriate to create and share such a work. Others felt that, although the parody was in poor taste, there was bigger issues at stake concerning freedom of speech and censorship. The two primary authors of the article did come forward and apologised. They said they had not intended to hurt anyone or to condone violence against women. Others involved in the incident refused to say sorry. Amidst the backdrop of this controversy, the New England School of Law offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Mary Jo's killer or killers. A telephone line was established by the investigative team, which they said would be staffed by a detective from the hours of 8 a.m. until midnight, every day until further notice. The reward went unclaimed, and eventually the telephone line was closed. The man seen hiding in the bushes near the crime scene was never identified, and it has never been established whether Mary Jo was killed by someone she knew or a stranger. The motive remains a mystery. On the 25th anniversary of the murder, in 2016, Gerald Frug wrote an introduction to a special edition of the New England Law Review, which looked to commemorate Mary Jo and her work. The pain Gerald and the children still felt was made plain. What had happened to Mary Jo had left a permanent wound that he and the children had to live with forever. Gerald Frug passed away in 2023. According to a true crime blog written by Alan Wurtzbicki of the Boston Globe, in 2016 the case remained open and was being actively investigated. The Middlesex County DA office was still examining people based on things witnesses had reported seeing around the time of the murder. They were also still looking into personal factors relating to Mary Jo and her family. In July 2019, a new cold case unit was established in the Middlesex County DA's office, and Mary Jo's murder was one of the first 3 cases it was tasked to look into. There have been no further updates. Mary Jo Frug's life and work continues to inspire and challenge law students, academics, and wider society. Her passion, wit, and intelligence still resonates with us. The person or persons responsible for her death remain at large. If you have any information about the 1991 murder of Mary Jo Frug, you can contact the Massachusetts State Police, assigned to the Middlesex District Attorney's Office, at 781-897-6600, or Crime Stoppers anonymously on 1-800-222-TIPS.